I bought an abandoned South Dakota farm for $7 because my German Shepherd and I had nowhere else to sleep. The county said the family who owned it vanished 37 years earlier. The townspeople warned me never to approach the welded grain silo after dark. But on our first night, Ranger heard three knocks beneath the frozen ground. Then a dead commander spoke through an air pipe and called me by name. What waited below that silo would expose a secret military program, bring my closest friend back from the dead, and force me to choose between saving the truth and saving the man I once believed I had abandoned. Before we continue, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Your support helps us keep telling powerful stories about courage, loyalty, second chances, and the extraordinary bond between veterans and the dogs who never leave their side. The first time Ranger heard the voice beneath the silo, I thought the South Dakota wind was playing tricks on both of us. Then the voice said my name, not Captain Cole, not Officer Cole. It said Ethan, the way a man says your name when he has known you for years, the way a dead man might say it if he had been waiting underground for you to arrive. But that happened later. 3 days earlier, Ranger and I were sleeping in a truck that had no business surviving another winter. The heater had stopped working somewhere west of Rapid City. I had pulled into an abandoned rest area before the snow covered the highway completely. By midnight, the wind was hitting the truck hard enough to shake the mirrors. I had wrapped myself in an old wool blanket and pushed my boots against the dashboard, trying to keep the feeling in my toes. Ranger lay across the passenger seat. He was a large German Shepherd with a black saddle across his back, a silvering muzzle and a scar that ran beneath his left shoulder. 9 years old, retired from military service, stubborn enough to ignore pain and proud enough to hide it. He had saved my life twice overseas. The second time had cost him part of the hearing in his right ear. I had never figured out how to repay a debt like that. So I stayed alive. Some nights that was all I could offer him. The wind rose again and struck the side of the truck. Metal groaned. A loose road sign clanged somewhere in the darkness. My eyes closed. For 1 second I was back in the desert. There was smoke where the snow should have been. Heat where the cold should have been. A radio screaming in my ear. 3 men trapped beyond a concrete wall. Then came the voice of Commander Owen Rourke. "Hold your position, Ethan." I could still hear him. Calm, certain, I had obeyed. 30 seconds later the building collapsed. 3 men from my team never came home. Ranger lifted his head before I realized I had stopped breathing. He stepped across the center console and pressed his nose against the inside of my wrist. Once, then again. It was something he had been trained to do after the doctors decided my memories were not memories anymore. They were ambushes. I opened my eyes. Snow covered the windshield. The desert vanished. Ranger kept his nose against my skin. "I am here," I whispered. His brown eyes stayed on mine. "I know where I am." That was only partly true. I knew I was inside an old pickup beside a closed highway. I knew I had $23 in my wallet, half a tank of fuel, 2 cans of dog food, and nowhere to sleep the next night. I knew the Navy had given me medals, a medical discharge, and a list of telephone numbers I never called. I knew people liked to say thank you for your service until service left a man unable to sit in a crowded restaurant or sleep beneath a real roof. What I did not know was what came next. Ranger finally pulled away and returned to the passenger seat. That was when I noticed the envelope on the floor. It had slipped from the dashboard during the windstorm. The envelope had been forwarded through 3 addresses. My name was written across the front in black ink. The return address belonged to the probate office of Hale County, South Dakota. I had carried it unopened for 4 days. Official envelopes rarely brought good news. They usually wanted money, signatures, explanations, or proof that I was still alive. I picked it up and ran my thumb beneath the flap. Inside was a deed, a county map, and a letter from a woman named Judith Crane. The first line made me laugh, not because it was funny, because I had forgotten what hope felt like, and sometimes hope sounds like a joke when you have been without it for too long. "Mr. Cole, you have been named the final eligible claimant to the Bellwether Farm under the Hale County Abandoned Homestead Reclamation Program." I read the sentence again. The Bellwether Farm consisted of 112 acres outside Coldwater, South Dakota. The property included a farmhouse, a barn, 2 equipment sheds, a dry well, and an old grain silo. The county had taken possession after unpaid taxes, failed auctions, and decades of legal dispute. No commercial buyer had accepted the property because of structural damage and unresolved historical claims. As a veteran with a documented connection to the former owner, I could assume ownership for a ceremonial filing payment of $7. I stopped reading. Ranger watched me. $7, I said. His left ear rose. The truck drinks more than that every time I start it. At the bottom of the letter was a handwritten note. Your connection was confirmed through the estate of Margaret Bellwether. She requested that the property be offered to you before demolition was authorized. I did not recognize the name. I searched my memory for a Bellwether from the teams, from training, from the hospitals, from anywhere. Nothing came. The letter included a deadline. If I did not appear at the Hale County Courthouse by noon the following day, the farmhouse would be condemned and the land transferred to a private foundation. I looked through the windshield at the snow. Coldwater was almost 4 hours away in good weather. The road outside had disappeared beneath white. I should have thrown the letter away. A damaged farm in a town I had never visited could not repair anything inside me. 112 acres of frozen ground would not bring my men back. A broken farmhouse would not become a home simply because I needed one. Ranger placed one paw on the envelope. I looked at him. You think that means something? He pressed harder. I pulled the letter from beneath his paw. You have no respect for county documents. His tail struck the seat once. That was the closest either of us had come to laughter in weeks. At first light, a snowplow passed the rest area. I started the truck. The engine coughed, shook, then turned over with the angry determination of something that resented being asked to live. I understood the feeling. We followed the plow east. The storm weakened after sunrise, but the land remained buried beneath white. Fences rose from the snow like the ribs of forgotten animals. Farmhouses stood miles apart, their chimneys sending thin lines of smoke into a pale sky. There was a kind of loneliness on the plains that felt different from the mountains. In the mountains, the land hid you. On the plains, it exposed you. Every mistake could be seen from miles away. Coldwater appeared shortly before noon. The town had one main street, a brick courthouse, a grain elevator, 2 churches, and a diner with a sign that read Ruthie's Kitchen. The courthouse clock showed 11:43. I parked at the curb and left Ranger in the truck with the windows cracked. He did not like it, neither did I. 10 minutes, I told him. He stared at me, 15 at most. His expression suggested that I had already broken the agreement. Inside the courthouse, a woman with iron-gray hair sat behind a wooden counter. She looked at my boots, my unshaven face, and the duffel bag over my shoulder. Then she looked through the window at Ranger. Mr. Cole, that depends on what? Whether you are about to hand me a farm or a lawsuit. She studied me for a moment. Then the corner of her mouth moved. Judith Crane, she offered her hand. Her grip was firm. You made it with 9 minutes to spare. I have been early to worse places. She brought me into a small office where several folders had already been arranged on a table. The legal process was simple enough to make me suspicious. The county would transfer the deed immediately. I would accept responsibility for the structures, fencing, and environmental hazards. Back taxes had been forgiven under the reclamation program. I would not be allowed to sell the land for 3 years. I would also be required to preserve any objects connected to the Bellwether family until the historical claim period ended. What historical claim? I asked. Judith adjusted her glasses. That is complicated. I have time. Her eyes moved toward the clock. You have less than 7 minutes. I placed in $7 on the table. Now I have 3 years. That earned another small movement at the corner of her mouth. She pushed the papers toward me. I signed where she pointed. When it was finished, Judith opened a drawer and removed a brass key attached to a faded wooden tag. The name Bellwether had been burned into the wood. She did not release it immediately. There is something you should understand before you drive out there. I assumed there would be. The Bellwethers disappeared in November of 1989. All of them? Walter Bellwether, his wife Margaret, and their teenage daughter, Rebecca. No bodies, none, signs of violence, nothing the sheriff could prove. Judith finally released the key. The supper table was set. A pot had burned dry on the stove. Their truck was still in the barn. Their coats were still hanging beside the door. I looked down at the key. And no one has lived there since? A few people tried. What happened? The first tenant lasted 2 nights. The next owner began repairs, then left without collecting his tools. A private company purchased the land 12 years ago, but never took possession. What company? Judith closed the folder. The Vale Veterans Renewal Foundation. I knew the name. Anyone who had spent time in military hospital knew it. The foundation funded treatment centers, service dog programs, and housing for injured veterans. Its director, Marianne Vale, appeared in newspapers beside generals, senators, and grieving families. They still want the land? I asked. They filed a request to acquire it after demolition. But Margaret Bellwether wanted me to have it. That is what her estate instructions said. You told me the family disappeared. Judith folded her hands. Margaret was declared legally dead, but a sealed estate amendment appeared 2 years ago. Who filed it? The document came through a law office that no longer exists. That does not sound suspicious at all. No, Judith said. It does not. I slid the key into my pocket. Why me? The amendment included your full service record and a handwritten sentence. Judith opened another folder and turned a copy toward me. The sentence was written in blue ink. Give the farm to the man who still believes he failed them. The room seemed to grow smaller. My fingers tightened around the edge of the table. Who wrote that? The handwriting matched Margaret Bellwether's records. She disappeared before I joined the Navy. I am aware of that. Then she could not have known me. Judith looked past me, toward the courthouse window. I did say it was complicated. Ranger was standing with his front paws against the passenger door when I returned. I opened it. He jumped down and circled me once, checking for threats, injuries, or signs that I had done something foolish. I bought a farm, I told him. He sniffed the brass key. For $7, he sneezed. That was my reaction. Before leaving town, I stopped at Ruthie's kitchen. I needed coffee, directions, and enough food to keep Ranger from eating the truck seats. The diner smelled like bacon grease, cinnamon, and old wood. 4 men sat at the counter. An elderly couple occupied a booth by the window. Conversation weakened when I entered. It stopped when Ranger followed me. A woman in her 70s approached with a coffee pot in one hand. Service dogs are welcome, she said. He is retired. So am I. Nobody makes me wait outside. She poured coffee before I sat down. Her name tag read Ruth. I ordered eggs, toast, and 2 hamburger patties without seasoning for Ranger. When I placed the Bellwether key on the table, Ruth stopped pouring. The coffee rose to the rim of my cup. She set the pot down carefully. Where did you get that? The county. One of the men at the counter turned on his stool. Nobody spoke. Ruth looked at Ranger, then back at me. You are going out there? That is generally what people do after buying a farm. The man at the counter stood. He was tall, perhaps 70, with hands shaped by decades of machinery. People do not buy Bellwether, he said. Apparently they do for $7. That land has been empty for a reason. What reason? He glanced at the others. No one answered for him. Ruth placed the hamburger patties in front of Ranger. He waited for my signal. Only after I nodded did he eat. The old man military dog? Yes. And you? Former Navy SEAL. The word still felt strange. Former sounded like dead with paperwork. The old man returned to his stool. My name is Amos Reed. I was there the morning they found the house empty. I waited. He rubbed one thumb against a scar on his palm. There were footprints in the snow behind the silo. Belonging to the family. Maybe. Where did they lead? They did not lead anywhere. I leaned forward. That is not possible. That is what Sheriff Daly said. Amos looked directly at me. The tracks began 20 feet from the silo, 3 sets. They crossed the yard and stopped in open ground. Snow covered the rest. It had stopped snowing 6 hours earlier. Someone at the counter muttered his name in warning. Amos ignored him. The sheriff dug where the tracks ended. He found nothing. What about the silo, welded shut? By whom? The Bellwethers, according to the report. Why would farmers weld a grain silo shut? Amos looked down at his coffee. That is the first good question anyone has asked in 37 years. The Bellwether farm lay 14 miles north of town. The paved road ended after 8, From there a narrow county route crossed open fields and low hills. Snow moved over the ground in long white ribbons. The directions brought us to a rusted mailbox leaning toward the ditch. Bellwether was still visible beneath the peeling paint. A chain blocked the driveway. I unlocked it with a smaller key Judith had included. Ranger left the truck before I could reach for his leash. He stood in the snow, nose raised, testing the air. The farmhouse sat half a mile from the road. It was larger than I expected, with 2 stories, a wide porch, and a roof damaged along the eastern side. Red paint survived beneath the eaves, though the rest had faded to gray. A barn stood behind it. Beyond the barn rose the silo. It was tall, narrow, and black against the winter sky. Even from a distance I could see metal bands welded across its access hatch. Ranger stared at it. "House first," I said. He did not move. Ranger. His good ear turned toward me. His eyes stayed on the silo. I had seen him behave that way before. In Afghanistan, he had once refused to enter a room every man on my team believed was empty. We found an explosive device beneath the floor. Another time he had stopped beside a drainage channel and stared at the darkness for almost a full minute. A wounded child was hiding inside. Ranger did not believe in ghosts. He believed in scent, vibration, heat, fear, and the 1,000 small truths human beings walked past. I placed my hand against his neck. "What do you have?" He moved forward 3 steps, then stopped. His nose lowered toward the frozen ground. There were no fresh tracks, no tire marks, no sign anyone had visited since the last storm. Ranger looked back at me. "Later," I said. "We need shelter before dark." He followed, but he checked the silo every few steps. The farmhouse key turned easily. That bothered me more than rust would have. The lock had been oiled. I pushed the door inward. Cold air came out, carrying the smell of dust, old paper, and something faintly medicinal. Ranger entered first. He cleared the front room with the slow discipline of his working years. Corner, doorway, staircase, hall. I followed with a flashlight in one hand and a tire iron in the other. The living room was crowded with furniture covered by yellowing sheets. A clock stood against the wall, stopped at 8:17. Family photographs lined the mantel. Walter Bellwether had a narrow face and heavy eyebrows. Margaret was small, dark-haired, and Searbeck appeared in several school photographs, always standing slightly apart from the other children. The final photograph showed the 3 of them beside the silo. Someone had scratched a deep line across Walter's face. The kitchen looked exactly as Judith had described. 3 plates sat on the table, 3 glasses, silverware placed neatly beside folded napkins. A blackened pot rested on the stove, coats hung by the rear door. One was a man's work jacket, one belonged to a woman. The third was a blue winter coat sized for a teenage girl. I touched the sleeve. Dust came away on my fingers. Ranger stood at the basement door. His body had gone rigid. I approached slowly. The door was secured with a sliding bolt from our side. Someone inside the basement could not have locked it. I drew the bolt and opened the door. Wooden steps descended into darkness. Ranger sniffed the air. Then he sneezed and backed away. "What is it?" A sour odor rose from below. "Standing water. Mold, animal remains. Nothing unusual for a farmhouse basement left alone for decades." Still, Ranger would not descend. I swept the flashlight along the steps. On the 3rd stair was a muddy footprint. It was not covered in dust. The edges were still sharp. I crouched. The print came from a narrow work boot, smaller than mine. Recent enough that moisture still darkened the wood. Someone had been inside the house after the last snowfall. Someone who had entered without leaving tracks outside. I closed the basement door and slid the bolt back into place. By then, the sun had dropped behind the western hills. I carried supplies from the truck, found dry wood beside the barn, and started a fire in the living room stove. The chimney drew well. Too well for something supposedly unused for 37 years. Ranger ate beside the hearth. I opened a can of beans and warmed it in a small metal pot. The house creaked as the temperature changed. Pipes knocked inside the walls. Wind pushed against the damaged roof. I told myself every sound had a reasonable cause. That is what trained men do when fear arrives. We give it names. Pressure, expansion, fatigue, distance. We measure it until it feels smaller. At 8:17, the clock against the wall began to tick. I heard it from across the room, one dry click, then another. The hands did not move. Ranger raised his head. The ticking stopped. I stood and approached the clock. There was no pendulum inside. No weights, no working mechanism that I could see. On the back panel, someone had carved 3 words into the wood. Listen below grain. A deep metallic sound rolled across the farm. Ranger was on his feet before the echo ended. The sound came again. Not thunder, not machinery, 3 slow strikes, metal against metal. From the direction of the silo, Ranger ran to the front door. I grabbed my coat, flashlight, and tire iron. The cold outside cut through me instantly. Snow whipped across the yard. Ranger moved ahead, nose low, following something beneath the surface rather than above it. We passed the barn. The silo towered over us. Up close, the welds across the hatch looked newer than the metal surrounding them. Someone had reinforced the entrance within the last few years. Ranger circled the concrete foundation. He stopped on the northern side and began scraping snow away with both front paws. Easy, he ignored me. Within seconds, he exposed a round iron plate set into the ground. It resembled a utility cover, but there were no markings. I knelt and cleared the remaining snow. A narrow pipe emerged beside it, no wider than my thumb. Ranger pressed his ear against the iron plate. 3 knocks sounded beneath his paws. He jumped back. I did not. I placed my hand flat against the metal. A vibration moved through it, regular, deliberate. Someone or something was striking from below. I leaned toward the narrow pipe. At first I heard only static, then came a soft mechanical hum, a real turning, a recorded signal. The voice that followed was weak and broken by years of decay, but I recognized it before it finished the first sentence. Commander Owen Rourke, the man whose funeral I had attended, the man whose empty coffin I had helped carry, the man whose final order had destroyed my team. Ethan Cole, the voice said beneath the frozen ground. If Ranger brought you to this silo, then you have finally reached the place where they buried the truth. The recording clicked off. I remained on my knees in the snow. Ranger stood beside me, staring at the sealed iron plate. For 6 years I had believed Commander Rourke died in the same operation that ended my career. Now his voice was waiting beneath a farm abandoned long before I had ever met him. The wind moved across the open fields. Behind us, the farmhouse clock began striking 8:17, and somewhere beneath the silo, something struck the iron plate in answer. For several seconds I could not move. Commander Owen Rourke had been declared dead 6 years earlier. I had watched a folded flag placed into his widow's hands. I had stood beside 3 empty chairs at a memorial service and listened while an admiral called our final operation an unavoidable tragedy. Now Rourke's voice had spoken from beneath an abandoned silo in South Dakota. He had not sounded surprised that I was there. He had expected Ranger to find the entrance. That disturbed me almost as much as hearing him at all. The farmhouse clock continued striking in the distance. 8:17, the same time frozen on its face. The sound carried across the snow, slow and hollow, until the final strike faded into the wind. Ranger pressed his nose to the narrow pipe beside the iron plate. The fur along his spine remained raised. I placed my ear near the opening. No voice came back, only the faint rotation of old machinery somewhere below us. Then that stopped as well. I looked toward the farmhouse. Every window was dark except the living room, where firelight moved weakly behind dusty glass. No vehicle lights approached from the road. No footprints crossed the field. The entire farm looked empty. It no longer felt empty. I dug my fingers beneath the edge of the iron plate and pulled. It did not shift. The cover had been fitted tightly into a concrete collar. A square recess near the center suggested it required a special key. I used the tire iron. The metal groaned but held. Ranger moved several feet away and began circling the silo again. Find another way, he knew that command. His nose lowered. He tracked along the concrete foundation, stopped near the western side, then continued toward the barn. I followed. The wind filled our tracks almost as soon as we made them. Inside the barn, darkness swallowed the flashlight beam. Old stalls lined one wall, rusted tools hung from pegs. A tractor sat beneath a canvas tarp, its tires collapsed into the dirt. Ranger passed all of it without interest. He moved toward the far corner where loose boards covered the floor. The same medicinal odor I had noticed inside the farmhouse lingered there. Not medicine exactly, disinfectant. The smell of military clinics, field hospitals, and rooms where men were told that pain was temporary. Ranger scratched at one board. I knelt and aimed the flashlight between the cracks. Something reflected below, metal. I lifted the board with the tire iron. Beneath it was a recessed compartment containing a canvas bag. The fabric had rotted along one edge, but the contents remained dry. Inside were 2 brass keys, a hand-cranked flashlight, a revolver wrapped in oilcloth, and a folded sheet of paper. The revolver was old but maintained. Someone had cleaned it recently. I checked the cylinder, 6 rounds. I placed it on the floor beside me and unfolded the paper. The message had been written in block letters. Ethan, do not open the silo after dark. The first recording is safe. The second is not. Trust the dog before you trust anyone who comes from town. Rourke had signed his name beneath the warning. Not with the formal signature I remembered from orders and evaluations. With the quick slanted mark he used on field maps. I stared at it. Ranger nudged my shoulder. I know. I read the warning again. Do not open the silo after dark. The voice below had activated at 8:17 after sunset. If Rourke wanted to protect me, why draw me to the entrance at the exact time he said not to open it? Unless the message had not been meant to bring me inside. Maybe it had been meant to prove that I had reached the right place. Or to tell someone else that I had arrived. The thought made me turn toward the barn doors. The opening showed only snow and darkness. I wrapped the revolver again and put it in the back of my waistband. The 2 brass keys were different sizes. One had a square shaft that matched the recess in the iron plate. The second was small and flat, with the number 3 stamped into its head. I placed both in my pocket. We wait until morning. Ranger looked toward the silo. I do not like it either. He stayed close as we returned to the farmhouse. The basement footprint waited where I had left it. So did the 3 plates on the kitchen table. I checked every room on the ground floor, then climbed the stairs. The second floor contained 4 bedrooms and a narrow bathroom. Walter and Margaret's room faced the fields. Their bed was made. A Bible rested on the nightstand beside reading glasses and a glass of water that had long since evaporated. Rebecca's room was smaller. Posters of horses covered one wall. A school jacket hung from a chair. Several shelves held books about radio systems, astronomy, and mechanical engineering. A tape recorder sat on her desk. Beside it was an empty cassette case marked Field Test 3. I removed the small key from my pocket. The number stamped into it matched the number on the cassette case. The desk had 3 drawers. The first held pencils and school papers. The second contained electrical components arranged in small envelopes. The third was locked. The key fit. Inside I found a notebook wrapped in waxed cloth. Rebecca Bellwether had written her name on the first page. The early entries were ordinary, school assignments, arguments with her father, a boy named Daniel who had stopped speaking to her after a dance, her mother's concern about winter feed prices. Then the entries changed. The first unusual one was dated October 19, 1989. Dad says the men from the foundation are only inspecting the silo. Mom says they are lying. She made me promise not to go near it after 8. A later entry read, there was a voice beneath the grain again. It used my name this time. Dad says it is a recording. I asked how a recording knows who is listening. Another entry. Mom says Commander Vale is not a doctor, no matter what uniform he wears. She says he studies fear. I stopped reading Commander Vale. Marion Vale's father had led the program. The diner story, the estate amendment, the foundation waiting to receive the land after demolition. None of it was coincidence, I continued. November 10th, they brought another soldier tonight. He was sedated. I heard him crying through the vent. Dad says they are helping him forget. Mom says forgetting is not the same as healing. November 17th, Mom showed me the emergency tunnel under the barn. She says if the siren sounds 3 times, I must take the red case and run to the north field. November 22nd, Dad argued with Commander Vale. He said the program was supposed to protect families. Vale said families were the control group. The final entry was dated November 26th, the night the Bellwethers disappeared. They know Mom copied the recordings. Dad is sealing the surface entrance. We are going below before supper so the house looks occupied. Mom says someone honest will come one day. She says the dog will know which voice is real. The entry ended there. No explanation, no goodbye. No mention of where they plan to go. I closed the notebook. Ranger stood at the bedroom door, looking down the hallway. A floorboard creaked near the stairs, not beneath my weight. I turned off the flashlight. The house went dark. Ranger moved silently to my side. Another creak came from below. Then the rear door opened. Cold air moved through the house. Someone was inside. I drew the revolver and stepped into the hallway. Ranger went ahead, body low. A narrow beam of light passed across the living room wall downstairs. One, possibly two. The beam disappeared. A whisper followed. "Check the stove." A man's voice. I moved down 3 steps, keeping the railing between us. Ranger remained beside my knee. The intruder entered the living room. He wore a white winter suit and carried a flashlight. A pistol hung low in his other hand. He was not searching for valuables. He moved directly toward the clock. A second figure entered behind him. This one carried a small metal case. The first man opened the clock's rear panel. "Empty," he whispered. The second turned toward the stairs. Ranger saw the movement, so did I. I aimed the revolver. "Put the weapons on the floor." Both men froze. The first raised his pistol slightly. Ranger growled. The sound filled the stairwell. The man lowered the gun. "Easy," he said. "That depends on you." The second man studied me from beneath a dark hood. "You are making a mistake, Mr. Cole. You came into my house with guns. This property contains hazardous equipment. So you entered without a warrant? We were sent to protect you by Marion Vale?" The 2 men exchanged a glance. That was answer enough. The first man began turning toward the kitchen. I tightened my finger against the trigger. "Do not." He stopped, placed both pistols on the floor, and slid them toward the fireplace. The first obeyed. The second did not carry a visible weapon. He lowered the metal case instead. "Now remove your hoods." The first man was in his 40s, broad across the shoulders, with a deep scar beneath his chin. The second was younger. I recognized him. He had been sitting at the counter in Ruthie's kitchen. He was the man who had warned Amos Reed not to speak. "You followed me from town," I said. His expression remained calm. "We knew you would come." "Who is we?" "You have heard enough already." "Not nearly." The older man looked at Ranger. He was part of the program. My grip tightened. "What did you say?" "The dog." Ranger's growl deepened. The man held up his empty hands. "Check the scar beneath his shoulder." "I know every scar on him." "Then you know it is not only from shrapnel." I remembered the surgical line beneath Ranger's left shoulder. Military veterinarians had told me they removed fragments after the operation. The scar had always seemed too long. The man continued. "Your dog carries an old frequency recognition implant. That is why the recording activated." I looked at Ranger. He remained focused on the intruders. "The Army tested identification systems for service animals," the man said. "Ranger's chip responds to equipment beneath the silo." Ranger served with the Navy, officially. The word landed hard. I had spent 6 years believing I understood the mission that destroyed my team. Now I was standing in a farmhouse where strangers knew more about my dog than I did. The younger man reached slowly toward his coat. Ranger lunged 1 step. The man stopped. "Take your hand out." He raised it, empty. "I have an authorization card. I do not care. You should. Marion Vale can explain everything. Then she can come herself." The older man shook his head. "She will not enter this property." "Why?" His eyes moved toward the floor. "Because she knows what is below it." A sharp tone sounded from the metal case. Both men reacted. The younger one looked down. A red light flashed near the handle. "What is that?" I asked. Neither answered. The tone repeated. The older man moved suddenly. He kicked one of the pistols toward the younger man and dove behind the couch. I fired into the floor beside the weapon. The blast shook dust from the ceiling. Ranger launched down the remaining stairs. The younger man reached for the pistol. Ranger struck him in the chest and drove him backward. The older man disappeared through the kitchen. I followed. The rear door slammed open. He ran into the snow. I reached the porch in time to see him cross the yard toward a dark vehicle near the barn. He was too far for a safe shot. I turned back. Ranger stood over the younger intruder. The man had stopped resisting. "Call him off. Do not move." The metal case continued beeping. I approached it carefully. A small screen displayed a countdown. 32, 31, 30. "What happens when it reaches 0? The man said nothing. I placed the revolver against his shoulder. "Your friend left you." His face changed. Fear replaced training. "It burns the local archive." "What archive?" "The silo recordings. How a radio pulse." "Can it be stopped?" He looked at the case. "Not from here." The countdown reached 24. I grabbed the case and ran outside. Ranger followed. The iron plate beside the silo had begun vibrating. The equipment below us was reacting to the signal. I threw the case into the open field and took cover behind the concrete base. The countdown reached 0. There was no explosion. A deep electrical pulse moved through the ground. The farmhouse lights flashed even though the building had no electrical service. The silo hummed, then every radio inside my truck switched on at once. Static roared from the speakers. A woman's voice emerged through the noise. "Archive purge initiated," the phrase repeated. Ranger pressed against my leg. I pulled the square key from my pocket and inserted it into the iron plate. Rourke's warning returned to me: do not open the silo after dark. If I waited until morning, the recordings might be gone. If I opened it now, I had no idea what else might activate. The woman's voice repeated again: "Archive purge initiated." I turned the key. A locking mechanism released beneath the plate. I lifted the cover. A ladder descended through a concrete shaft. Red emergency lights glowed below. Warm air rose from the opening, carrying disinfectant, dust, and the unmistakable smell of old electrical equipment. Ranger looked down. "Stay." He ignored me and placed his front paws on the ladder. Of course, I climbed first. The shaft descended about 20 feet into a narrow corridor. Ranger followed carefully, using metal steps built into one side of the wall. At the bottom, an arrow pointed toward a steel door marked agricultural storage. The label had been painted over another sign. I scraped it with my thumb. Beneath the paint were the words "Behavioral Recovery Unit." The door opened with the second brass key. Inside was a control room. Dust covered the consoles, but several machines still operated on emergency power. Reel-to-reel recorders lined one wall. Filing cabinets filled another. A map showed tunnels extending beneath the silo, barn, farmhouse, and north field. The countdown device had awakened the entire system. Red lights flashed above a console: "Archive purge." 4 reels were already spinning at high speed. A heating element beneath them began to glow. I crossed the room and pulled the main power lever. Nothing happened. The system ran from a separate battery bank. Ranger began barking near a cabinet. Inside, thick cables connected the recorders to a black junction box. I used the tire iron to break the box open and tore free the largest cable. The machine slowed. One reel snapped. Another stopped inches above the heating element. Silence returned. I stood there breathing hard. Ranger sniffed the cabinets. The facility had been built to survive decades underground. It had also been designed to destroy itself if someone came too close to the truth. A green light blinked on one of the recorders. Beneath it was a handwritten label: "First recording." I remembered Rourke's warning. "The first recording is safe." I pressed play. Static filled the room. Then Rourke spoke. "My name is Commander Owen Rourke. The date is January 14th, 2020. 2020, less than a year before our final operation. If Ethan Cole is hearing this, then Marionvale failed to recover the Bellwether archive." Ranger stood beside me. Rourke continued: "Ethan, everything you were told about Operation Glass Harbor was false." My mouth went dry. The target building was never an enemy communications site. It belonged to a private extraction team funded through the Vail Foundation. Your men were sent there because someone needed witnesses removed. I gripped the edge of the console. Images returned. The building, the radio interference, the order to hold position, the explosion. Rourke's voice remained steady. "I gave the command that kept your team inside." My chest tightened. I believed the extraction team was transporting civilians. I learned too late that they were moving American test subjects connected to Project Hearth. The name appeared on several folders nearby: Project Hearth. The program began beneath Bellwether Farm in the early 1980s. Its stated purpose was to treat combat trauma through controlled memory exposure. The true purpose was different: a pause. They learned how to identify a soldier's strongest source of guilt. Then they learned how to deepen it. I looked at Ranger. He touched his nose to my wrist. The recording continued. Guilt made veterans obedient. It made them silent. It made them blame themselves for orders they had never truly chosen. The room seemed to tilt. Every nightmare, every year of believing I had failed my men, every doctor who told me the event had become distorted by trauma. Maybe the distortion had not begun inside me. Ranger was assigned to you after receiving signal response conditioning connected to Hearth. He was meant to monitor your episodes and lead you toward specific triggers. My hand moved to the scar beneath his shoulder. Ranger looked up at me. But the conditioning did not work as intended, Rourke said. The dog bonded with you. He began interrupting the episodes rather than reinforcing them. I almost laughed. Of course he had. People had built a system to control pain. Ranger had chosen to protect me from it. The Bellwether family discovered what the program was doing, Rourke continued. Margaret copied the records. Walter tried to shut the facility down. Their daughter, Rebecca, altered the signal system so trained dogs could identify safe recordings. That explained the notebook. The dog will know which voice is real. I do not know what happened to the Bellwethers after they entered the tunnels. I know only that Commander Adrian Vale ordered the farm sealed and the investigation redirected. Marion Vale's father, his daughter, has spent most of her life containing what he began. She may tell you she is protecting veterans. Part of her believes that. Do not underestimate her. Rourke took a breath. The second recording contains the names of every subject, handler, physician, and official connected to Project Hearth. I looked across the room. A second recorder stood behind a clear protective cover. A red label beneath it read Restricted Archive. The recording is protected because it can trigger conditioned responses in surviving subjects. Do not play it without first disabling the frequency generator beneath the north field. The second recording is not safe. Rourke's warning finally made sense. If you hear the names before the generator is disabled, every subject within broadcast range may experience a full traumatic recall. My eyes moved toward the ceiling. Coldwater was only 14 miles away. The Foundation had funded veterans throughout the region. How many lived nearby? How many had been part of the program without knowing it? Rourke's voice softened. Ethan, I am sorry I closed my eyes. I chose the mission over the men. I told myself obedience would save lives. It did not. For 6 years I had wanted to hear him admit that. Now that he had, the anger did not come, only exhaustion. You did not fail the team, he said. I did. The recording clicked. Then it resumed with a final sentence. If Marion Vale reaches the farm, ask her what happened to Rebecca. The tape ended. For a long time I stood without speaking. Ranger remained close. I placed my hand against his neck. You were never leading me into the memories. His tail moved once. You were pulling me out. A sound came from the corridor. Not machinery. A human cough. Ranger turned immediately. His ears rose. The cough came again, weak, distant. We followed the corridor deeper underground. Several doors opened into observation rooms with thick glass windows. Old beds stood behind restraints. Speakers had been mounted above each pillow. On the walls, technicians had written phrases in grease pencil. Subject responds to command voice. Subject rejects family stimulus. Canine presence reduces compliance. At the end of the corridor, a stairwell descended farther. The air grew warmer. Ranger moved faster. We reached a locked medical ward. The square key did not fit. I struck the latch with the tire iron until the metal bent. The door opened inward. A battery lantern glowed on the floor. Beside it sat a folding chair, canned food, blankets, and a portable oxygen tank. Someone had been living there. A woman lay on a narrow bed. She appeared to be in her early 50s, though illness had aged her. Her hair was gray at the temples. A clear tube rested beneath her nose. Her eyes opened when Ranger approached. She looked at him first, then at me. You took longer than I expected, she whispered. Who are you? Her gaze moved across my face. Your commander said you would ask that before checking whether I was armed. My hand tightened around the revolver. She gave a weak smile. Owen always understood you. Rourke is dead. So are many people who never stopped speaking. I stepped closer. Your name, she reached beneath the blanket. Ranger growled. Her hand emerged holding an old photograph. The image showed a teenage girl standing by the Bellwether silo. Rebecca, the same serious eyes, the same narrow face. Older now, but unmistakable. My name is Rebecca Bellwether, she said, and Marion Vale has spent 37 years making sure no one knows I survived. Before I could respond, a low alarm began pulsing through the facility. Rebecca's expression changed. She found the open shaft. Marion? She never comes alone. The lights shifted from red to blue. A mechanical lock engaged somewhere behind us. Rebecca struggled to sit up. You stopped the archive purge, but that only triggered the containment system. What containment system? The doors seal first. A heavy impact echoed from the corridor. Then the ventilation closes. The air vents above us snapped shut. And after that, I asked. Rebecca looked toward Ranger. The silo fills with carbon dioxide. Ranger barked toward the stairwell. Footsteps sounded above. More than one person. Rebecca grabbed my sleeve. There is another exit beneath the north field, but Marion controls it from the surface. I checked the oxygen tank. Less than half full. Enough for Rebecca. Not enough for all of us. Can you walk for a little while? Then we move now. I helped her from the bed and placed the oxygen tank across my shoulder. Ranger led us into the corridor. The air already felt heavier. Behind us, the medical ward door locked itself. Ahead, blue lights flashed over the words Behavioral Recovery Unit. Rebecca leaned against me as we moved. There is something you need to know before we reach the second tunnel. Tell me while we walk. The men in your team did not all die in that building. I stopped. Ranger looked back. Rebecca struggled to breathe. One of them survived. The alarm continued pulsing. Who? Her eyes filled with something worse than fear. Chief Daniel Mercer, my closest friend, the man whose body I had never seen. The man whose name I still spoke whenever the nightmares became too strong. Where is he? I asked. Rebecca looked toward the sealed tunnel beneath the north field. Marion has him. Chief Daniel Mercer was alive. For 6 years I had carried his name like a stone beneath my ribs. Daniel had been the last man I saw before the building came down. He had stood in a broken doorway with blood running from his forehead, waving 2 younger operators toward the rear exit. I had shouted for him to move. He had smiled at me. Not because anything was funny. Daniel smiled when everyone else was afraid. Then Commander Rourke ordered me to hold the western position. I obeyed. The roof collapsed before I could reach Daniel. The official report said no one survived. Now Rebecca Bellwether was telling me that Marion Vale had him. I gripped her arm tighter as we moved through the underground corridor. How do you know Daniel survived? I treated him. When? After they brought him back to the United States. The air grew heavier with each breath. Blue emergency lights pulsed along the walls. Somewhere behind us, the ventilation system had shut down completely. Ranger ran ahead, then returned every few seconds to make sure we were following. What did they do to him? I asked. Rebecca stumbled. I caught her before she fell. The same thing they did to every man who knew too much. That is not an answer. They gave him new memories. The corridor seemed to narrow around me. You cannot give a man a memory. You can give him an image, a sound, a sensation. You repeat it until his mind builds the rest. Where is he? At the Vale Veterans Renewal Center outside Coldwater. I had seen photographs of the center in magazines. White buildings surrounded by grass, walking trails, and flags. Marion Vale had built a national reputation there. Veterans went to that place for treatment. Families sent their sons and husbands there because they trusted her. How many patients are part of Project Hearth? Rebecca looked at me. More than Marion will admit. A metal door blocked the passage ahead. A wheel-shaped handle had been mounted at its center. Beside it was a control panel with no power. Rebecca pointed toward a pop running along the ceiling. Manual release. Behind the bracket, I lifted her against the wall. She reached behind the pipe and pulled a narrow cable. Nothing happened. Again, she said. I raised her higher. She pulled with both hands. A latch released inside the door. I turned the wheel. The metal resisted, then opened with a grinding sound. Cold air entered through the gap. Ranger pushed past me. Beyond the door was a narrow tunnel supported by old timber beams. Frozen dirt covered the floor. The tunnel climbed gradually toward the north field. I carried Rebecca's oxygen tank over one shoulder and supported most of her weight with my other arm. The alarm behind us grew faint. For the first time since we entered the silo, I could feel moving air. We were close to the surface. Ranger stopped. He stared into the darkness ahead. What is it? His nose lifted. Then I heard an engine above us. A vehicle crossed the field slowly. Another followed. Rebecca closed her eyes. She is sealing the exits. How many ways out? 3, the silo shaft, the barn tunnel. This one. Then she knows where we are going. She has known every move I made for years. Why did she leave you alive? Rebecca opened her eyes. Because I am the only person who can safely play the second recording. The tunnel ended beneath a circular hatch. I pushed against it. The hatch moved less than an inch before striking something heavy. A vehicle had been parked over the exit. Ranger scratched at the wall to our right. Loose soil fell away beneath his paws. I aimed the flashlight. A narrow space opened behind the timber support. Cold air flowed through it. "Drainage channel," Rebecca whispered. "It should lead toward the creek." The opening was too small for a standing person. It might be large enough to crawl through. I removed my coat and placed it beneath Rebecca's knees. She shook her head. "If it collapses, I will block you. You know the route. Ranger knows it better." The dog was already halfway inside. I secured the oxygen tank behind Rebecca with a length of canvas strap. Then I helped her into the opening. She crawled slowly, stopping every few feet to breathe. I followed behind her. The earth pressed against my shoulders. Roots scraped my face. Frozen water soaked through my sleeves. There was no room to turn around, no room to fight. For a moment the dirt became concrete rubble. I heard the building collapse again. I heard Daniel shouting from behind the wall. I stopped crawling. My lungs tightened. The drainage channel disappeared. I was back in Glass Harbor, trapped beneath dust while my team called for help. A wet nose touched my fingers. Ranger had returned through the tunnel. He pressed his head beneath my hand. The memory broke. I breathed into the frozen earth. "I am moving." Ranger backed away. I followed him. The channel widened near the creek. We emerged beneath a collapsed section of fencing nearly 100 yards from the field hatch. Snow had begun falling again. The storm erased the horizon. Rebecca lay on her back, breathing through the oxygen tube. Ranger shook dirt from his coat. I looked toward the silo. 3 dark vehicles surrounded it. Men in winter gear moved between the farmhouse and barn. They had lights, weapons, and equipment cases. At the center of them stood a woman in a long gray coat. Even from a distance, I knew who she was. Marion Vale had appeared in enough photographs that her posture was recognizable before her face. She stood without a hat while snow collected in her silver hair. She was not directing the men. She did not need to. They moved as if every order had already been given. Rebecca saw her. "She will not stop. Neither will we." I helped Rebecca stand. The creek ran south toward the county road. If we stayed below the bank, the field would hide us. We had made it less than 50 yards when Ranger growled. A man stepped from behind a cottonwood tree. Amos Reed. The old mechanic from the diner held a rifle across his chest. He looked at Rebecca. His face seemed to lose 20 years. "My God," he whispered, "you really are alive." Rebecca leaned against me. "You should not be here, Amos. I could say the same to you." I moved slightly in front of her. "Lower the rifle." Amos did not point it at us, but he did not lower it either. "Marion has men on the road," he said. "You will not make it to town." "You work for her?" His jaw tightened. "I work for people who cannot survive what is on those tapes." "Is that what she told you?" My son spent 16 years waking up with memories that did not belong to him. Amos looked toward Ranger. The Vale Center gave him his life back. By hiding what caused it. By giving him enough peace to raise his children. Rebecca stepped beside me. "Your son was not treated, Amos. He was conditioned, do not." "He still hears the command tone, does he not?" Amos's expression changed. "He still loses time when the church bell rings 8 times. Stop talking." "He still wakes beside the north window because the program taught him to wait for extraction." Amos raised the rifle. Ranger moved between us. I kept my voice low. "Amos, look at me." His eyes remained on Rebecca. "Marion said you would open the archive," he whispered. "She said you would bring it all back. She is using your fear. You do not know what fear looks like in my house." "No, I know what it looks like in mine." The rifle barrel trembled. I took one step forward. "My best friend may be alive because your foundation kept him hidden. My men were sent into a trap for 6 years. I believe that was my fault. That truth will not heal you. Maybe not." I moved another step. "But the lie has been killing me." Amos's eyes filled with tears he refused to let fall. "My son trusts Marion, then let him hear what she did and decide for himself." A vehicle engine started behind us. Headlights cut through the snow. Amos glanced toward the field. That was all Ranger needed. He lunged, caught the rifle sling in his teeth, and pulled. The weapon fired into the air. I struck Amos's wrist and took the rifle. He fell against the creek bank. Ranger released the sling and stood over him. Amos did not resist. He looked toward the lights approaching through the storm. "I am sorry," he said. I did not know whether he meant the rifle, the foundation, or the 37 years he had spent protecting a lie. A black utility vehicle stopped above the creek. 4 armed men stepped out. Marion Vale followed them. She walked down the bank slowly. Snow caught in the folds of her coat. Her gaze moved from me to Ranger, then settled on Rebecca. "Hello, Becky." Rebecca's body stiffened. "No one calls me that anymore." "Your mother did. You are not my mother." "No," Marion said. "I am the woman who kept you alive after she was gone." Rebecca's voice shook with anger. "You kept me underground. I kept my father from finding you. He died 20 years ago. And the men who funded him did not." Marion turned to me. "Captain Cole, I am not a captain anymore. Titles do not disappear because we stop using them. Neither do crimes." Her expression did not change. "I expected Commander Rourke to send someone. I did not expect him to choose you. He said you had Daniel." "I do." My heart struck hard against my chest. "Take me to him." Marion studied me. "You are not going to ask whether he is safe? If he were safe, you would not have hidden him. That is a simple answer to a complicated question. Take me to him." One of her men moved closer. Ranger bared his teeth. Marion raised one hand. The man stopped. "He remembers you," she said. The words hurt more than I expected. "Then why has he never contacted me?" "Because whenever Daniel Mercer remembers Ethan Cole, he tries to kill him." The snow moved between us. I waited for her to continue. She did not. "That is impossible, is it?" Marion reached into her coat. Ranger stepped forward. She removed a small audio player and placed it on the ground. "I will not play this unless you ask me to." "What is it?" "A recording from Daniel's treatment." "Treatment?" "Yes. You mean conditioning." "I mean the work that stopped him from tearing out his own stitches and attacking every person who entered his room." Rebecca shook her head. "You created that response." "My father created it. I inherited the consequences." "You inherited his laboratory." "I entered to a hospital." Rebecca laughed once. There was no humor in it. "You put clean windows above the same basement." Marion looked at me. "I can take you to Daniel. I can also show you exactly what Project Hearth became. What do you want in return?" "The second archive." "I do not have it. You know where it is, and you cannot play it without Rebecca." Marion glanced toward her. "That is why we are all going to the center. We are not going anywhere with you." A faint tone sounded from the audio player at her feet. Ranger cried out. His legs folded beneath him. I dropped beside him. His eyes were open, but his body shook violently. "Turn it off." Marion pressed a button. The tone stopped. Ranger tried to stand. His rear legs failed. I lifted his head into my lap. "What did you do?" The signal did what it was designed to do. I reached for the revolver at my back. 3 rifles rose around me. Marion did not move. If I wanted him dead, Captain Cole, I would not have stopped the tone. I looked down at Ranger. His breathing came fast. His scar twitched beneath the fur. "Can you reverse it?" "At the center." Rebecca gripped my shoulder. "She will use him to control you. She already is." Marion's face softened, though I could not tell whether the emotion was real. "Your dog is experiencing a neurological overload. He needs medication within the hour." I wanted to shoot her. I wanted to carry Ranger into the storm and keep moving. But he had spent years choosing my life over his safety. I could not gamble with his because my pride demanded resistance. "Take us to the center." Rebecca pulled away. "No. Ranger needs help. Marion will never let us leave." "I will not leave him here." Rebecca stared at the dog. Her anger slowly gave way to grief. She nodded once. Marion's men lifted Ranger onto a stretcher. I stayed beside him as they carried him to the vehicle. They took the revolver and rifle. Marion sat across from me during the drive. Rebecca remained near the rear door, guarded by 2 men. Amos was left beside the creek. As the farm disappeared behind us, I saw smoke rising from the direction of the barn. "What are your men burning?" "Nothing that matters." "Everything down there matters. The archive is safer than you think." "You tried to destroy it. I tried to stop it from broadcasting." Marion leaned forward. "You heard Rourke's first recording. That means you know the second contains names and proof. It contains trigger sequences tied to those names. Rebecca can disable them. Rebecca believes she can." Rebecca looked up. "I wrote the safety protocol." "When you were 17, Marion said, before the system was expanded, you expanded it?" "My father did. You kept it running. I kept it contained." The road became smoother beneath us. The Vale Veterans Renewal Center appeared through the snow shortly before midnight. It sat behind tall iron gates on a low hill south of Coldwater. Warm lights filled every window. American flags lined the entrance. A stone monument near the main building carried the names of veterans the foundation claimed to have helped. A place could look honorable while hiding almost anything. Ranger was taken through a medical entrance. I tried to follow. 2 guards blocked me. Marion touched my arm. He will receive care. I stay with him. You will see him after we speak. I removed her hand. We speak beside the dog. Daniel is waiting. Every part of me wanted to follow Ranger. Then a man appeared behind the glass doors at the end of the hall. He was thin. His hair had gone gray. A burn scar covered the left side of his neck. But I knew the way he stood. Weight balanced over the balls of his feet. Right shoulder, slightly lower from an old training injury. Chief Daniel Mercer, alive. He looked at me through the glass. For 1 second, neither of us moved. Then Daniel smiled. The same smile he had given me before the building collapsed. I walked toward him. The glass doors opened. Daniel. He raised his hand. A guard stepped between us. Daniel looked at the guard with confusion. Then he looked back at me. His eyes were clear. Ethan, he said. My throat closed. I had imagined that moment in 100 different ways. I had imagined anger, relief, questions. I had never imagined silence. Daniel crossed the room and placed both hands against my shoulders. You made it out, he whispered. So did you. His smile faded. Not all of me. I pulled him into an embrace. For a moment he held me. Then his body went rigid. His hands tightened against my back. Daniel, he shoved me away. His face changed. Recognition vanished. He reached for the guard's weapon. I caught his wrist. Daniel struck me in the throat, drove his shoulder into my chest, and sent both of us into the wall. Traitor, he shouted. I blocked the next blow. Daniel, it is me. You left us inside. Marion stood in the doorway. Do not fight the memory, Ethan. Let it pass. Daniel swung again. I caught his arm and turned him away. I came back for you. You held the door. That did not happen. You held the door while they burned. His voice broke. The guards rushed forward. I released him before they could hurt him. They restrained Daniel and injected something into his arm. His strength faded quickly. As they lowered him onto a chair, his eyes found mine. For 1 brief second he recognized me again. I am sorry, he whispered. Then he lost consciousness. Marion dismissed the guards. You see the problem. You put that memory inside him. My father's physicians did, and you never removed it. Removing a memory is not surgery. Pull the wrong thread and the entire mind can come apart. I looked at Daniel. What does he believe I did? He believes you locked your team inside the target building. Why? To make you and Daniel enemies. Why would anyone care whether we trusted each other? Because you were assigned as mutual controls. The words meant nothing at first. Then they meant too much. Marion walked toward a dark window. Project Hearth paired soldiers with people or animals they trusted completely. The program measured how much trauma was required to break that bond. I looked toward the medical wing where Ranger had been taken. Daniel was my control and you were his, Ranger. A later addition. The program wanted to know whether loyalty in a trained animal could be redirected more easily than loyalty in a man. Anger rose through me, clean and steady. You tested that on us during active operations. My father did. You keep saying that as if it clears your hands. Marion turned. It does not. That was the first honest thing she had said. She opened a door leading into a small conference room. A leather folder rested on the table. Inside were medical files, mission reports, and photographs from Glass Harbor. One photograph showed Daniel being carried from the collapsed building. The men carrying him wore no military's insignia. Another showed Commander Rourke beside Marion at an airfield. The date was 3 weeks after Rourke's supposed death. Rourke survived too, I said. For a while. How did he die? He came here looking for Daniel, and he suffered a cardiac event during exposure to the second archive. You killed him. No, but I failed to save him. Where is his body? Buried beneath his real name in Nebraska. I studied the photographs. Why did he send me to Bellwether Farm? Because he believed guilt made you incorruptible. He was right. No, Marion said softly. Guilt made you predictable. She pushed another document toward me. It was the estate amendment that had transferred the farm. Rourke's signature appeared beneath Margaret Bellwether's. The amendment was not written by Margaret, Marion said. Judith said the handwriting matched. It was copied from her records. By Rourke? Yes. The farm had not come from a woman who somehow knew my future. Rourke had arranged it. He had used Margaret's name, my service history, and the county program to pull me toward the silo. Even his confession had been part of a plan. What did he want me to do? Release the archive publicly, then that is what I will do. Marion's eyes hardened. If you broadcast it, hundreds of veterans may experience what Daniel experienced when he saw you. Rebecca can separate the evidence from the trigger signals. She cannot. You do not know that. I know because Rebecca helped me try. I turned toward her. Rebecca stood in the doorway between two guards. She looked exhausted. You worked with Marion? Her face tightened. Years ago, you told me she kept you underground. She did. But you helped her. I was trying to protect the subject. For how long? Rebecca did not answer. Marion did. 23 years. The betrayal was quieter than a gunshot. It cut deeper. Rebecca stepped into the room. We removed hundreds of active sequences. You let me believe you had been hiding from her. I was hiding from the board that controls the foundation. You said Marion had Daniel. She does. You said she would never let us leave. She will not if the board arrives. Marion looked toward the hallway. They are already on their way. Who are they? The people who funded Project Hearth after my father died. How many? Enough to make the local police irrelevant. A telephone rang on the conference table. Marion answered. She listened without speaking. Then she looked at me. The farm is burning. I moved toward her. What did your men do? It was not my order. But face of disposal, the archive. Marion ended the call. The board sent a recovery team before I reached the creek. They are destroying the surface structures. Then we go back. The roads are closing. We go anyway. Marion stepped between me and the door. They have Daniel's original conditioning files. Where? At the farm. You said the files were here. The treatment copies are here. The original recordings were kept beneath the north field. Rebecca looked at Marion. You told me they were destroyed. I lied. That confession changed the room, not because Marion had lied, because Rebecca had believed her. A medical alarm sounded in the hall. I recognized Ranger's bark beneath it. One sharp cry. Then another. I ran. The guards tried to stop me. Marion ordered them back. I reached the treatment room and found Ranger strapped to a padded table. A physician stood beside him with a syringe. A monitor showed irregular waves racing across the screen. Take the restraints off. He is seizing. He is afraid. The physician hesitated. I tore the strap from Ranger's chest. His head lifted. His eyes found me. I placed my wrist against his nose. Once, then again his breathing slowed. The violent movement in his legs eased. The physician stared at the monitor. What did you do? Nothing. Your machines understand. Ranger pressed his nose against my skin. I leaned close to his ear. We are going home. Marion entered behind me. The farmhouse may already be gone. The farm is not the house. I removed the remaining restraints. Ranger tried to stand. His legs shook, but he stayed upright. Daniel's voice came from the hallway. Ethan. He stood between two guards, pale from the sedative. His eyes were clear again. In one hand he held a key card taken from the guard beside him. In the other he held a pistol. The barrel pointed toward Marion. You told me he was dead, Daniel said. Marion did not move. Daniel, put the weapon down. You told me Ethan died in the building. His hand trembled. You showed me his body. That image was part of your conditioning. You kept me here for 6 years. I kept you alive. Daniel looked at me. Pain moved across his face. I remember the door. It was not real, I said. I remember you holding it closed. I know. I remember hearing them burn, I know. His eyes filled. How do I know which memory belongs to me? I stepped toward him. You do not have to know tonight. He looked at the pistol, then at Marion. A red light began flashing above the hallway doors. The facility entered lockdown. Marion turned toward the security panel. They are here. Dark vehicles passed through the front gates. Not one, not three, a full convoy. Men in black tactical gear entered the lobby. The Foundation guards lowered their weapons without resistance. The people Marion feared did not need to force their way inside. They owned the building. A voice sounded over the public address system. Marianne Vale. Surrender Rebecca Bellwether. Ethan Cole. Daniel Mercer, and the military canine. All other personnel will be released. Daniel raised the pistol. Marion looked at me. For what it is worth, Captain Cole, I never intended for the board to find you. Then help us leave. There is a service tunnel beneath this wing. Where does it lead? To the old ambulance garage. Rebecca entered carrying a small metal case. What is that? I asked. The only clean copy of the second archive. Marion stared at her. You told me it was destroyed. Rebecca held her gaze. I lied. Gunfire struck the lobby doors. The lights went out. Emergency illumination filled the hall. Daniel moved to my side. For the first time in 6 years, my friend and I stood shoulder to shoulder. Ranger placed himself between us. Rebecca gripped the archive case. Marion opened the service tunnel. Before we entered, she caught my arm. There is one more thing Rourke never told you. I looked back. The explosion at Glass Harbor was not meant to kill your team. What was it meant to do? Marion's face was nearly colorless beneath the emergency lights. It was meant to activate you. A second burst of gunfire shook the building. Activate me for what? She looked toward Ranger. To kill Daniel Mercer. To kill Daniel Mercer. Marion's words stayed with me as the service tunnel closed behind us. The corridor was barely wide enough for 2 people. Concrete walls pressed close on either side. Emergency lights glowed along the floor, turning our shadows into long, broken shapes. Daniel walked ahead with the stolen pistol. Rebecca followed him, carrying the metal case that contained the second archive. Ranger stayed against my leg. Marion came last. Gunfire struck the sealed door behind us. The impact moved through the tunnel like distant thunder. What activates me? I asked. Marion did not answer immediately. Keep moving. I have spent 6 years obeying people who said that. Another burst struck the door. Dust fell from the ceiling. Marion looked at Ranger before meeting my eyes. A sequence of sounds. Rotor wash. A broken radio transmission. 3 impacts against metal. I thought about the silo. 3 strikes beneath the iron plate. The farmhouse clock striking 8:17. The signal that had called Ranger toward the entrance. You activated it at the farm. I did not. Your equipment did. The system recognized Ranger's implant and began its old identification cycle. And what happens when I hear the full sequence? Marion's voice lowered. You enter a state of extreme threat response. That sounds like a polite way to say I lose control. You remain functional. Functional for whom? She did not answer. Daniel stopped walking. He turned toward us. For me, he said. His face had gone pale beneath the emergency lights. The program made him see me as the target. Marion shook her head. Not exactly. Then explain it exactly, I said. The conditioning linked Daniel to the moment your team was lost. When the sequence activates, Ethan's mind interprets Daniel as the man responsible. Daniel stared at me. That is why Rourke kept us apart. Yes, and my memories of Ethan locking the door? Your conditioning made him the betrayer. Daniel gave a tired laugh. They made each of us believe the other killed the team. They wanted to measure which response would win, Rebecca said. Obedience or loyalty. The words were almost lost beneath the sound of the men breaking through the tunnel entrance behind us. Daniel looked down at his pistol. What happens if both of us activate at the same time? Marion's expression told me before she spoke. You try to kill each other. Ranger moved between Daniel and me. His body touched both our legs. Daniel looked at him. Then he is the control. No, Rebecca said. He became the interruption. A dog bred for war had done what every physician, commander, and machine had failed to do. He had chosen love over programming. The tunnel ended at a steel ladder. Marion climbed first and entered a code into a ceiling panel. A hatch opened into the ambulance garage behind the treatment center. Snow blew through the opening. The storm had grown stronger. An old utility van stood beside 2 modern ambulances. Marion pointed toward the van. The electronic locks on the new vehicles can be disabled remotely. That one predates the system. Daniel checked the garage doors. They will see us leave. They already know we are here, I said. Rebecca opened the rear of the van. Medical blankets, oxygen cylinders, and emergency supplies filled the cargo area. Ranger jumped inside. Daniel helped Rebecca climb after him. I turned to Marion. You are coming. She looked toward the treatment center. If I leave, the board takes the facility. They already took it. There are patients inside. They asked for us. Give them what they want, and they may leave the others alone. You believe that? No. Marion looked through the garage window. Armed men crossed the courtyard. Some wore no insignia. Others wore Foundation security uniforms. It was impossible to know which employees had surrendered and which had always belonged to the board. I built this center to undo what my father created, Marion said. You also used the same system. I used pieces of it. You used it on Ranger beside the creek to stop you from releasing the archive. You hurt him because you wanted obedience. The accusation struck her harder than anger would have. She looked away. My father used to say pain was simply another form of instruction, and you believed you were different for a long time. A bullet shattered the garage window. I pulled Marion down. Daniel fired twice toward the courtyard. The gunman moved behind an ambulance. That conversation is over, he said. We entered the van. Marion drove. I sat beside her while Daniel guarded the rear doors. The garage gate opened slowly. A black vehicle blocked the exit. Marion accelerated. The van struck it near the rear wheel. Metal folded. Glass burst across the hood. The impact threw me against the dashboard, but the old van kept moving. We broke through the gate and reached the county road. 2 vehicles followed. Snow crossed the pavement so heavily that the road vanished beneath us. Marion drove from memory. You cannot outrun them in this, Daniel said. We do not need to outrun them, Rebecca replied. We need to reach the farm before they do. The farm is burning, I said. The surface is burning, she answered. The Northfield archive is protected by concrete. Marion gripped the wheel. If they brought thermal charges, concrete will not matter. What is stored there besides Daniel's files, I asked. Rebecca held the metal case tighter, the original subject recordings. How many thousands? Names, medical histories, command sequences, mission dates, family interviews. Daniel leaned against the rear wall. They recorded families? They studied what each soldier feared losing, Rebecca said. A wife's voice, a child crying, a father expressing disappointment. Anything that could be turned into pressure. The van slid sideways. Marion corrected before we reached the ditch. Headlights appeared behind us. The first pursuing vehicle gained quickly. Daniel opened a narrow rear window. I have 4 rounds. Save them, I said. For what? The moment 4 rounds matter. The headlights moved closer. A dark vehicle struck the rear bumper. Rebecca fell against the wall. Ranger barked and braced himself over her. The vehicle struck again. Daniel raised the pistol. Before he could fire, Marion turned hard onto an unmarked farm road. The van drifted across the snow. The pursuing vehicle missed the turn and continued toward the ditch. The second followed us. Where does this road go? I asked. Bellwether property. This is not the county entrance. My father built a service route from the treatment center. The road passed between rows of dead cottonwood trees. Branches struck the roof. The headlights behind us disappeared, then returned. They know the route, Daniel said. Of course they do, Marion replied. They paid for it. A gate appeared ahead. Marion did not slow down. The van struck the wooden barrier and broke through. The Bellwether farm emerged through the storm. The barn was burning. Flames climbed through the roof and bent sideways beneath the wind. Black smoke crossed the snow, turning the night into a moving wall of ash. The farmhouse remained standing, but fire had reached the porch. The silo towered beyond it. 2 vehicles were already parked near the north field. Men carried equipment toward the underground hatch. They beat us here, Rebecca said. Marion stopped the van behind a stone equipment shed. We need the generator beneath the north field, Rebecca continued. Without disabling it, we cannot safely separate the archive. How long? I asked. If the control's intact, several minutes. And if they are not? Longer. Daniel checked the pistol. Then we give her several minutes. Marion opened a compartment beneath the dashboard and removed another handgun. I looked at her. You kept a weapon in a medical van? I work with veterans. Daniel almost smiled. It was the first glimpse of the man I remembered. We left Rebecca inside with Ranger. He objected immediately. Stay with her, I told him. Ranger looked toward the field. Then back at me. Protect Rebecca. That command he accepted. Daniel and I moved toward the north field while Marion circled toward the farmhouse. The storm covered our approach. Snow struck my face hard enough to sting. The men near the hatch had erected portable lights. A cable ran from their equipment to a generator mounted on a tracked vehicle. I counted 6. 2 guarded the vehicles. 4 worked near the hatch. Daniel touched my shoulder and pointed toward an irrigation trench. We crawled into it. For a few seconds the years disappeared. He moved the way he had overseas, quiet, patient, certain of where I would be without looking. I felt the old rhythm return between us. Then metal struck metal near the hatch. Once, twice, 3 times, the sound passed through me. My vision narrowed. Snow became dust. The field lights became fire. Daniel's face changed. He was no longer beside me. He stood in the doorway at Glass Harbor, blood on his forehead, a detonator in his hand. He had betrayed us. He had called the strike. He was the reason they died. My hand moved toward his throat. Daniel turned. His eyes had changed too. He raised the pistol toward my chest. For one terrible second, neither of us saw a friend. We saw the enemies placed inside our minds. Then Ranger hit us. He had left the van. His body struck Daniel's arm as the pistol fired. The bullet passed beside my head. Ranger landed between us and barked. Not a warning bark. Daniel blinked. I saw recognition return to his face. My hand was still gripping his jacket. I released him. He lowered the weapon. What did I do? The same thing I almost did. Ranger pressed his nose against my wrist, then turned and did the same to Daniel's hand. Daniel stared at him. He remembers both of us. He remembers what is real. Gunfire cut through the storm. A bullet struck the soil beside Ranger. We dropped into the trench. The men near the hatch had seen us. Daniel fired one round at the portable lights. Glass exploded. Half the field went dark. I crawled toward the tracked generator. Ranger moved beside me despite my order to stay. 2 men descended into the trench ahead. The first carried a rifle. I struck the barrel aside before he could aim. Daniel hit him from the opposite direction. The second man fired. The shot struck Daniel's shoulder. He fell backward. I drove the man into the frozen wall and took his weapon. Daniel gripped his wound. Blood spread between his fingers. You always get the easy side, he said. You are smiling. I smile when everyone else is afraid. I pulled him upright. The portable lights went out completely. Marion had reached the power cable. Rebecca ran from the van carrying the metal case. Ranger moved to her. We crossed the remaining ground together. Marion opened the hatch using a foundation access key. A narrow staircase descended beneath the field. Go, she said. I will slow them down. You cannot hold 6 men. I do not need to. She pointed toward the burning barn. The wind had carried flames toward the equipment vehicles. Fuel cans were stacked near one of them. Marion fired into the can. The first shot missed. The second struck metal. Fuel poured across the snow. The third round ignited it. Fire raced beneath the vehicles. The men scattered. Marion followed us into the hatch and sealed it. The underground chamber was larger than the control room beneath the silo. Rows of cabinets stretched into darkness. Real machines stood behind thick glass. At the center was a steel tower surrounded by copper coils. The frequency generator. Rebecca approached the control console. The screen remained active. Someone had entered a destruction command. A timer showed less than 10 minutes. What happens when it reaches 0? Daniel asked. The generator overloads, and the archive. The heat destroys everything in this chamber. Marion looked toward the ceiling. The blast may also collapse the tunnels. Rebecca opened the metal case. Inside were several reels, a small transmitter, and a handwritten index. We need to connect the clean copy, isolate the trigger channel, and send the evidence through the emergency antenna. Send it where? I asked. Every public frequency within range. Marion shook her head. The board will jam it. The old weather relay is analog. They cannot block it without disabling their own communications. Daniel leaned against a cabinet. Blood ran down his arm. How long? Rebecca looked at the timer. Longer than we have. A pounding sound came from the hatch above. The recovery team had reached it. Marion pointed toward a lower corridor. There is a manual shutoff beside the cooling reservoir. Rebecca turned. That passage floods when the containment system begins. Then someone has to reach it before the timer expires. I will go, I said. Daniel pushed away from the cabinet. No, you stay with the archive. You are wounded. And you are the only person who can get the evidence out if this fails. You think I am leaving you again? Daniel held my gaze. You never left me the first time. The words stopped me. He took a breath through the pain. I do not remember everything, but I remember enough. What do you remember? You running toward the building after the order told you to stay. His voice weakened. I remember Rourke's men dragging me away before you reached the door. The memory I had wanted for 6 years arrived in the middle of a burning farm, with armed men above us and a bomb counting down beneath our feet. It did not erase the pain. It gave it a shape I could finally recognize. Daniel placed the pistol in my hand. Get the truth out. He entered the lower corridor. Water already covered the floor. Ranger followed him. No, I said. The dog did not stop. Daniel looked back. I think he has decided which one of us needs him more. The two disappeared into the passage. Rebecca connected the first reel to the transmitter. Marion moved to the steel door and prepared to defend it. I watched the corridor where Ranger had vanished. The timer dropped below 7 minutes. Water began flowing into the chamber. At first it covered only the soles of my boots. Then it reached my ankles. Rebecca adjusted the signal controls. A line of sound moved across the monitor. Voices filled the room. Names, dates, testimony. A woman describing how her husband returned from treatment with memories of a daughter they had never had. A medic admitting he used command tones on sedated patients. A young Rebecca identifying her father's equipment. The truth did not sound dramatic, it sounded tired. That made it more powerful. The steel hatch shook. Marion fired through the narrow opening when the outer lock broke. Someone shouted above us. She sealed it again. How close? I asked. Rebecca did not look away from the console. I have separated most of the low-frequency pattern. Most? One channel is embedded in the spoken names. Can you remove it? If I remove the entire channel, we lose the identification evidence. The timer showed 5 minutes. Water reached my calves. A gunshot struck the hatch, then another. Marion looked toward me. When they enter, they will come for the transmitter first. Then do not let them reach it. She gave a faint smile. That sounds like an order. It is a request. I have never been good with those. A light turned green on Rebecca's console. Transmission path open. Send it. Not yet. What are you waiting for? The final authentication code. Where is it? On the original recording, Daniel went to recover. I looked toward the flooded corridor. The water had reached my knees. The timer showed 4 minutes. Ranger barked somewhere in the darkness. Once, then twice, a third bark did not come. I entered the corridor. Rebecca grabbed my arm. Ethan, the archive needs you. Daniel needs me. If you leave, Marion and I may not hold the room. If I stay, I become the man the program wanted me to be. She released me. I pushed into the water. The passage sloped downward. Within several yards, the water reached my waist. Emergency lights flickered beneath the surface. Daniel, no answer. I moved deeper. The current grew stronger near an open doorway. Inside, shelves had collapsed across the room. Daniel was trapped beneath a steel rack. Water covered his chest. Ranger stood on the rack, trying to pull at Daniel's jacket. A reel case floated near the far wall. Daniel saw me. Take the recording. I reached for the rack. It is too heavy. The shutoff is behind me. I pushed. The steel did not move. Water rose to Daniel's neck. Ethan, save your breath. The archive dies without that reel. I heard you. Then take it. Ranger jumped into the water and swam toward the floating case. The current pulled him sideways. He struck the wall, regained direction, and closed his teeth around the leather handle. The dog dragged the case toward the doorway. Daniel laughed weakly. He never did follow the plan. That makes 3 of us. I placed my shoulder beneath the rack. The old wound in my back burned. Nothing moved. Daniel's face slipped beneath the water. I pushed harder. Metal lifted half an inch. Ranger reached the doorway with the case. He dropped it, returned to Daniel, and bit the sleeve of his jacket. Together we pulled. Daniel's body shifted. The rack fell again. His wounded shoulder caught beneath it. He cried out. The timer alarm sounded through the corridor. 2 minutes. I could take the reel. I could return to Rebecca. I could send the evidence before the chamber burned. Daniel looked at me through the rising water. He knew what I was thinking. Go. 6 years earlier, a commander had told me to hold my position while my men died beyond a wall. For 6 years, I had believed obedience was the same as failure. Now Daniel was giving me permission to leave. Leaving still would have been wrong. I dropped the reel beside Ranger. Then I reached beneath the rack with both hands. I am not choosing the mission this time. Daniel's eyes closed. I lifted. Every injury I had collected over 20 years seemed to tear open at once. My knees slipped. The rack fell. Ranger barked beside my ear. I tried again. This time Daniel pushed with his free arm. The rack rose. He dragged his shoulder from beneath it. We fell backward into the current. Water carried us into the corridor. Ranger grabbed the reel case and followed. 1 minute. We reached the main chamber. Gunmen had broken through the upper hatch. Marion fired from behind a cabinet. Rebecca stood at the transmitter. Authentication reel. Ranger ran through the water and dropped the case beside her. Rebecca opened it. The reel inside had remained dry. She mounted it on the final machine. Daniel collapsed near the console. I pulled him behind cover. The timer reached 30 seconds. Rebecca entered the code. The transmitter began to hum. Marion's pistol clicked empty. A man stepped through the hatch and aimed at her. Daniel fired the last round from the weapon he had taken from me. The man fell backward. 20 seconds, the broadcast light turned green. Voices began transmitting through the old weather relay. Names, orders, payments, mission records. The history of Project Hearth moved into the storm. 10 seconds. I saw the manual shutoff lever across the chamber. The flooding had lifted a cabinet against it. No one could reach the lever in time. Marion looked at the timer, then at Rebecca. My father started this beneath your home. She crossed the chamber, Marion. No, Rebecca shouted. Marion climbed onto the floating cabinet. She reached through the coils surrounding the generator. Electricity moved across the copper. Her body jerked. She kept reaching. The timer showed 3 seconds. Marion closed her hand around the manual lever. She pulled. The generator died. Darkness swallowed the chamber. The timer stopped. For several seconds, the only sound was water moving through the cabinets. Then the emergency lights returned. Marion lay beside the generator. Rebecca reached her first. She pressed 2 fingers against Marion's neck. Her face answered the question none of us asked. The woman who had spent her life protecting her father's lie had died stopping it from taking one more life. Above us, the armed men went silent. The broadcast continued, not only through the weather relay. Through every radio the generator had once controlled. Across Coldwater, across the Vale Center, across the vehicles surrounding the farm. The archive was speaking where no one could bury it again. Ranger lay beside Daniel. His body trembled with exhaustion. I placed one hand against Daniel's shoulder and the other against Ranger's neck. Neither moved away. Then a new voice came through the transmitter. Commander Rourke, this is the final record of Project Hearth. What follows is my sworn confession. Rebecca looked at me. I did not put that on the reel. The recording continued. If Ethan Cole reaches this point, he will be forced to choose between preserving the evidence and saving Daniel Mercer. My blood went cold. Rourke had known. He had designed the path. Even the final choice had been part of the experiment. His voice filled the flooded chamber. The board believes Ethan will choose the mission. They believe guilt can make duty stronger than love. Ranger raised his head. Rourke paused. I believe they are wrong. The transmitter clicked. Then came his final words. Because the dog taught him better. Because the dog taught him better. Commander Rourke's final words moved through the flooded chamber and disappeared into static. For a moment no one spoke. Water swirled around our knees. Emergency lights flickered above the rows of ruined cabinets. Marion Vale lay beside the generator she had shut down with her own hands. Daniel rested against the console, blood soaking through his shoulder. Ranger stayed between us. The old transmitter continued sending Project Hearth into Boris the Spawn. Every confession, every payment, every altered mission report, every name the board had buried beneath military language and medical promises. The truth was no longer trapped beneath Bellwether Farm. It had escaped. A voice came through the speaker above the hatch. Captain Cole. The voice belonged to one of the recovery team leaders. We are coming down. Daniel reached for the empty pistol beside him. I took it away. No more. They will kill us. Maybe. That is your plan? My plans have not been impressive lately. Despite the pain, Daniel almost smiled. The speaker crackled again. Step away from the transmitter. I looked at Rebecca. Is the broadcast still active? Yes. Can they stop it from above? Not without cutting the relay tower. How long until the complete archive is transmitted? She checked the reel. About 11 minutes, the steel hatch began opening. Ranger rose. His legs shook from exhaustion, but he placed himself in front of us. I rested my hand against his back. You have done enough. He did not agree. The hatch opened several inches. A weapon appeared through the gap. Then another sound came from above. A vehicle horn, long, continuous. Gunfire followed outside the chamber. The weapon disappeared from the hatch. Men shouted on the surface. Someone yelled for the recovery team to drop their rifles. Another voice ordered them to hold position. Then came the unmistakable sound of a shotgun being loaded. Amos Reed shouted through the storm, "You heard the radio." Everybody in Coldwater heard it. "Put the weapons down before this town decides you are the enemy." The recovery team leader answered him. "You do not understand what is happening." Amos's voice came back. "I understand armed strangers are standing on my neighbor's land." Neighbor. The word reached me more deeply than it should have. Until that night, I had been a man who slept in a truck and avoided giving people enough time to remember his name. Now an old mechanic was standing above a flooded bunker, calling me his neighbor. More engines arrived, truck doors slammed, voices gathered in the snow. Some belonged to the men from Ruthie's kitchen. Others belonged to local farmers, volunteer firefighters, and sheriff's deputies. The broadcast had reached more than radios. It had reached people who had spent decades suspecting that something beneath their town was wrong. The recovery team had arrived, prepared to silence 4 witnesses and a dog. They had not prepared to confront an entire community. The leader spoke again. "This is a federal security matter." A woman answered him, "Judith Crane. No federal agency transferred this land to you. I handled the deed myself. You need to leave." "No," Judith replied. "You need to explain why armed men entered private property and attempted to destroy county evidence." A deputy ordered everyone to lower their weapons. The silence above stretched. Then one rifle struck the frozen ground. Another followed. Within a minute, the recovery team began surrendering. Rebecca watched the archive reel turn. "They are giving up too easily." "They expected secrecy," I said, "not witnesses." Marion had understood that in the end. She had spent most of her life trying to control the truth because she believed the public could not survive it. In her final moments, she stopped controlling anything. She chose to trust people with what her father had done. It was not enough to erase her crimes. Nothing could do that. But it was enough to save the lives in that chamber. The archive finished transmitting shortly before dawn. Sheriff's deputies entered first. They found us beside the console, surrounded by floating files, damaged machines, and the history of a program no official report admitted existed. The deputies carried Daniel to the surface. Rebecca refused a stretcher until they carried Marion out. Ranger climbed the stairs on his own. I followed last. The storm had weakened. Snow covered the field, but parts of it had turned black from smoke and ash. The barn had collapsed. Half the farmhouse roof was burning. Firefighters moved through the yard, pulling hoses from their trucks and cutting away damaged boards. The silo still stood. It rose above the lights and smoke like a monument to everything the land had been forced to hold. Amos waited near the north field hatch. His rifle lay on the ground. A deputy had placed him in handcuffs after learning he had pointed it at us beside the creek. When Amos saw Rebecca, he lowered his head. "I should have listened to you 37 years ago." Rebecca stopped in front of him. "You were 19. I was old enough to know fear was making my decisions. You thought you were protecting your family. So did Marion." Rebecca looked toward the covered body being carried from the field. "That does not make what we did right." Amos raised his eyes. No, for a moment they simply looked at each other. Two survivors of the same night. Two people who had spent most of their lives making choices beneath the weight of someone else's secret. Rebecca touched his shoulder. "Tell the truth now." Amos nodded. "I will." The farmhouse fire was contained after sunrise. The eastern rooms were destroyed. Part of the second floor had collapsed. Water and smoke damaged nearly everything else. The living room clock survived. A firefighter carried it from the house with blackened hands. The face remained stopped at 8:17. The carved message on the back was still visible. "Listen below grain." Rebecca touched the wood. "My mother wrote that." "You are certain she carved it the night we disappeared?" "What happened to Walter and Margaret?" Rebecca sat on the rear step of an ambulance. Ranger settled beside her. For several seconds, she watched steam rise from the wet farmhouse. "My father discovered that Commander Adrian Vale planned to move Project Hearth to military bases overseas. He copied the financial records. My mother recorded the patient interviews. They planned to expose it. They planned to reach a reporter in Minneapolis. What stopped them? Vale's men arrived before we could leave." She looked toward the north field. "My parents took me through the emergency tunnel. We were supposed to separate at the creek and meet near the state line. You reached the meeting point. They did not. Rebecca's fingers tightened around the edge of the blanket. I spent 2 days hiding in an empty livestock trailer. Amos found me. I looked toward him. He gave me food and drove me to a church outside the county. But his father worked for Commander Vale. When Amos returned home, they threatened his younger brother. So Amos told them where you were. Yes. What happened then? Marion came first. Rebecca's voice changed when she said her name. Not forgiveness, not hatred, something more complicated. Marion was only a few years older than I was. She knew what her father would do if he found me. She moved me before his men arrived. She saved you. That night she did. And your parents? Commander Vale caught them near the creek. Rebecca looked toward the burning remains of the barn. My father was shot. My mother was taken into the facility. She died below the farm, no. Rebecca's eyes lifted to mine. She became the first person Marion helped escape. I had believed the Bellwether family vanished in one night. The truth was more complicated. Walter had died trying to protect the evidence. Margaret and Rebecca had survived under false names. What happened to Margaret? She lived in Nebraska for another 19 years. Then the estate amendment could have been real. Part of it was. Rebecca nodded toward the clock. My mother wrote the original instructions. She wanted the farm given to a veteran who could not be frightened away. But she did not name me, no. Rourke added your records after she died. And the sentence about the man who believed he failed them. Rourke wrote that. I looked toward the silo. Even from the grave, Commander Rourke had manipulated the path. He had lied to the county. He had arranged the deed. He had used my guilt to pull me toward the archive. But he had also confessed. He had trusted Ranger to break the final command. A man could do something brave without becoming innocent. A man could do something wrong without losing every part of his honor. I had spent years judging myself by the worst order I ever followed. Maybe people were more than the worst thing they had done. That did not free them from responsibility. It gave them the chance to choose differently when the next moment came. Daniel was taken to a hospital in Rapid City. The bullet had passed through his shoulder without striking bone, but infection from years of poor treatment had weakened him. Doctors said his recovery would be slow. I remained beside Ranger while a veterinarian examined the implant beneath his scar. The device had shifted during the signal overload. Removing it immediately could damage the nerves controlling his front leg. The veterinarian disabled its response circuit and left the implant in place. He may have episodes for a while, she told me. What kind? Disorientation, tremor, sensitivity to sound. Will he recover? She looked at Ranger. The dog was watching me rather than her. He has recovered from everything else, has he not? Yes. Then I would not underestimate him. I stayed on the clinic floor that night. A nurse offered me a chair. I told her the floor was fine. Ranger rested with his head across my leg. Every few hours his body trembled. Each time I placed my wrist beside his nose once. I am here, I told him. I know where I am. For the first time, both statements were completely true. The Project Hearth investigation spread far beyond Coldwater. The archive Rebecca transmitted reached emergency frequencies, local stations, private radios, and several amateur radio operators who recorded the broadcast before anyone could stop it. Copies moved across the country before sunrise. Military investigators arrived, then federal prosecutors, then reporters. The Vale Veterans Renewal Foundation closed its treatment center while every patient file was reviewed by an independent medical team. Several board members tried to leave the country. 2 succeeded. The others were arrested. Officials denied knowledge of Project Hearth until their signatures appeared in the archive. After that, they said the program had ended decades ago. More recordings proved it had continued. Then they called it unauthorized. Financial records showed years of approved payments. The language changed each time the evidence grew stronger. The truth did not change with it. Families came forward. Some wanted justice. Some wanted privacy. Some did not want old memories examined by strangers. Rebecca insisted that patient names be protected whenever possible. The program took away their right to choose, she said. We do not expose them in the name of repairing that crime. That decision frustrated reporters. It protected the people who mattered. Amos testified before a federal grand jury. He admitted helping conceal Rebecca's survival. He also admitted warning the Vale Foundation when I arrived. Because he cooperated, and because Rebecca spoke on his behalf, the state reduced the charges against him. He spent several months in county custody. After his release, his first stop was the Bellwether farm. By then, winter had begun to loosen its grip. Daniel stood beside me on the porch when Amos's truck entered the drive. Daniel's arm remained in a sling. His face looked older than the man I remembered, but some of his humor had returned. Ranger rose from the patch of sunlight where he had been sleeping. He watched Amos leave the truck. No growl, that was enough. Amos carried a wooden toolbox. "I came to repair what I helped burn," he said. Daniel looked at the damaged farmhouse. "You brought a bigger toolbox somewhere?" Amos stared at him. Then Daniel smiled. Amos laughed once. "It was a rough sound, almost forgotten. Truck is full." The rebuilding took most of the spring. People came from Coldwater without waiting to be asked. Ruth brought food every Saturday. Judith helped sort the surviving Bellwether records. Volunteer firefighters repaired the eastern roof. Farmers replaced fencing and cleared the remains of the barn. Some people came because they had heard the broadcast. Others came because a house had burned and someone needed help. Both reasons mattered. Rebecca claimed the room upstairs that had once belonged to her. The horse posters were damaged, but part of one remained beneath the smoke. She chose not to remove it. "I spent 37 years trying to become someone else," she told me. "I think I can live with seeing who I was." She did not move into the farmhouse permanently. She bought a small place closer to town and returned whenever the underground archives needed to be cataloged. The facility beneath the silo was eventually transferred to a historical and medical review trust controlled by veterans and patients, not military contractors. The dangerous signal equipment was dismantled. The treatment rooms were left untouched. Some history should not be polished until it looks harmless. Daniel remained with us through the summer. His memories returned in pieces. Not all of them were accurate. He learned his action whenever a memory brought sudden rage. Who benefits if I believe this? Sometimes the answer was no one. Sometimes the answer was a dead commander, a secret board, or a machine buried beneath a field. Sometimes the answer was simply fear. Daniel and I never recovered every moment we lost. We stopped trying to force them into a perfect story. Healing was not a courtroom. It did not require every fact before it allowed a man to live. One evening, Daniel and I sat on the porch while Ranger rested between us. The wheat field beyond the creek had turned gold. The farmhouse smelled of fresh-cut lumber and coffee. Daniel rubbed the scar near his shoulder. "You really paid $7 for this place?" $7 and most of my remaining sanity. Sounds overpriced. "You are welcome to leave. I have considered it." "Doors over there," he smiled. Neither of us moved. After a while, Daniel looked toward Ranger. "Did you know he would find the silo?" "No. Rourke did. Rourke believed he would. There is a difference." "Yes." I watched Ranger's ear turn towards a sound in the grass. Rourke still believed the program could predict loyalty. He thought Ranger would follow his conditioning. "But Ranger chose you." "No." I rested my hand against the dog's neck. "Ranger chose what was right." Daniel considered that. Then he nodded. Summer became fall. The county offered to purchase the North Field for the Memorial Trust. I refused. I allowed access to the underground facility, but the land remained part of the farm. Too many people had spent too many years believing institutions were the only things strong enough to protect the truth. Sometimes protection looked like a locked archive. Sometimes it looked like a deed in the hands of a man who had nowhere else to go. The farmhouse clock was repaired by a retired watchmaker from Coldwater. He replaced the damaged gears but left the scorch marks on the case. When he returned it, the hands moved for the first time in 37 years. Rebecca set the correct time, then she hesitated. "Do you want me to remove the carving?" "No, listen below." Grain remained on the back, not as a warning, as a reminder. The most important truths were often hidden beneath the ordinary things people passed every day. A farm, a hospital, a folded flag, a veteran who said he was fine. A dog who refused to look away. Ranger's episodes became less frequent. He still disliked metal striking metal. Whenever the farmhouse clock reached 8:17, his good ear lifted. For the first few months he came to find me. Later he only opened his eyes. One cold evening near the end of November, snow began falling over Bellwether Farm. A year had passed since the county transferred the deed. I sat on the porch wearing Walter Bellwether's repaired work jacket. Daniel had moved into a small house near Rapid City, where he began helping veterans review false memories connected to Project Hearth. Rebecca was spending Thanksgiving with Amos and his family. Ruth had sent enough food to feed a squad. Ranger lay beside my chair. The fields disappeared beneath white. The truck that had once been our home sat near the equipment shed. Amos had repaired the engine, though I rarely drove it. I kept it because I needed to remember the man who had arrived. Not to punish him, to honor the distance he had traveled. The farmhouse clock struck 8:17, one chime, then another. Ranger raised his head. We listened together until the final strike faded. No voice came from beneath the silo, no machine awakened. No command entered my mind, only the wind moved across the farm. Ranger rested his head on my boot. I looked through the window at the lights inside the house. For years, I believed home was a place where nothing could reach me. I was wrong. Home was the place where I no longer had to face everything alone. I had not found Bellwether Farm because I was strong enough to save it. The farm found me when I had almost stopped believing I could be saved. It gave Daniel a path back to the truth. It gave Rebecca her name again. It gave a frightened town the courage to speak. It gave Marion one final chance to become different from her father. And it gave Ranger enough room to finish the mission he had chosen for himself. Not the mission written into his implant, not the mission assigned by Commander Rourke. The one he had chosen the first night he pressed his nose against my wrist and refused to let me disappear inside my own memories. Keep Ethan here, that had always been his mission. I leaned down and rested my hand against his neck. You did it, partner. His tail struck the porch once. Snow covered the road leading away from the farm. For the first time in my life, I did not feel the need to follow it. I had spent years searching for an exit. Now I had a reason to stay. And the home that cost me $7 had finally become the one thing no amount of money could buy. A place where the truth could live. A place where an old soldier could forgive himself. A place where a loyal dog could close his eyes without standing guard. Some wounds remain hidden because the people carrying them have become very good at smiling. Ethan believed he needed to recover every lost memory before he deserved peace. In the end, he learned something simpler. Healing did not begin when the past became perfect. It began when he stopped facing it alone. Ranger could not erase what happened. He could not return the years Ethan and Daniel lost. But he could remain beside them until fear no longer made every decision. That may be the greatest lesson of Bellwether Farm. A person is not defined only by the worst order they followed, the truth they failed to speak, or the years they spent running. What matters is the choice they make when life gives them one more chance to stand, protect someone, and come home. Thank you for sharing this journey with us. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you do not miss the next story in our collection. As long as you continue listening, we will continue telling stories that honor loyalty, courage, family, and the quiet strength it takes to begin again.